Welcome to the Freakshow Podcast. Today will be a very different take on our show. There will be no intro, no other podcasters, no Xander, no anyone. Going to get straight into some short stories that were sent to us. I was sent this story by a middle-aged man by the name of Curtis Miller. The story is called The Gander Snatch. My name is Curtis Miller. When I was about 14 years old, one of the worst things that could have happened to me happened. My parents were taken away from me and it's all my fault. One could say that I'm merely upset with myself and blaming myself for my parents' appearance. If you'd sit and read my story, then maybe you'd understand. I was native born in Germany, and I lived there up until the point in time where I was 6 years old. One of my favorite things to do in Germany was visit my grandma in Rothenburg. Her house was filled with what we now could call antique furniture. My grandmother was probably as old, if not older, than a lot of it too. The house, even older than her. She possessed the house from an ancestor before her, who had gotten it from an ancestor before them. In fact, I don't know how old the house is on its own. It's a historical stain on the maps. My grandmother practically was too. She could have told you she had to fight dinosaurs to get to school, and you'd probably believe her. The house on the inside was beautiful but small. It had a royal feel to it, though. She sadly lived alone now that her husband and my grandpa passed away from liver cancer. I would stay with my grandma occasionally and keep her company on the weekends because my parents wanted to go on vacation or something of the sort. But every time I would stay at my grandmother's, though, she would tell me about this horrible creature that plagues her. Its name doesn't make much sense in English, but it can be roughly translated to the Gander Snatch. She spoke German like I used to. I will roughly translate and summarize what she said. Long ago, when I was a little girl, a little older than you are now, my father, your great-grandfather, died away from home. It was all my fault. I damned him. My father was a soldier, and my mother was put to work to keep the family alive. So I wept multiple nights for father to return. I soon cursed him and grew hatred for him over the fact that he had left me. A month or so later, that year in 1939, we were informed that he had died in battle against the Polish. We were given his cleaned uniform and condolences. My mother was devastated. My mother became a widower, and yet that status was short-lived. Soon another man came along, and he had these dogs that absolutely hated me. They would always bark at me and scare me. I know they were just dogs, but they still scared me because I was a little 8-year-old girl who had just lost her father. This new man was much younger than my mother and was rarely around. However, when he was around, he was never nice to me. One day, one of his dogs came to start being very comfortable around me. However, I was still scared of him. He was a small golden Spitz breed dog, which was very contrary to the other dog, who was a shepherd dog. The small dog ended up coming into my room for the nights. The Spitz dog would curl up onto this small velvet rug placed neatly in my room, and the moonlight would hit him through the bedroom window, making him look like a freshly baked bun on a nicely placed velvet platter. However, he'd become very hyper, and he would jump onto the bed with me, where I'd kick him off and yell at him too. Even though he was a little thing, he still terrified me for some reason, and I didn't want him up on the bed. Plus, I would get into trouble. I went to sleep that night and slept very well. I slept through every creak, as the house is ancient and made noise. I slept through the yelling I slept through the yelling from my new stepfather. However, I didn't sleep through the cold licks on my cheek. I got up and told the dog to get off the bed, where then I noticed he was asleep. To find the window had cracked open. I guess I'd forgotten to close it. The next night, the same thing happened again, but after waking up and closing the window, I noticed these glossy eyes of something in the corner of my room. I reached over for my lamp and twisted its knob violently as it squeaked with each twist. The rusty lamp dimly lit my room where I could see what I thought I saw wasn't there. The next night, the same thing happened again, with the exception of the fighting for my mother and her new man as they slept peacefully this night. I did not. I woke up to the cold tongue of the wind again. This time the window was all the way opened. I looked around the room for these eyes again, and I didn't see them. The blanket on the end of the bed slowly slid off. Then tapping under the bed started. I twisted the copper knob again and the room lit up, and silence fell. The wind shut up. The cold turned warm. I looked for the fluffy spits to find the velvety rug was ripped into pieces. The hard oak floorboards now were bleeding with scars printed in by something of an immense force. The dog was gone. The dog was gone. I went to wake my mom, and she yelled at me to go back to sleep. When I went back to my room to shut the window, I saw the Spitz dog following a shady figure into the roads behind our house. However, when examining him, you'd expect to see the back of a head or some hair or even a hat. All I saw were glossy eyes. He wasn't walking backwards either. While he walked one direction, his head was watching me through another direction. Every turn. Excuse me. I got lost. When I looked out, I saw the Spitz dog following a shady figure into the road behind our house. However, when examining him, you'd expect to see the back of a head or some hair or even a hat. All I was met with were glossy eyes. He wasn't even walking backwards either. His head was watching me through every turn like an owl's would watch a mouse. Then I saw the wet smile emerge as he neared a turn down the road. When they turned, his head didn't follow, nor his eyes. They kept piercing my skull with a narrow stare they had. The glossy eyes and smile disappeared behind a dark configuration of houses. The little roll of a dog was gone too. I didn't sleep that night, or see the dog in the morning. There was never a corpse found either. Strangely, there was blood found in my bedroom where the dog was taken, but no blood down the street. My stepfather hated me and blamed me forever. My mother shunned me, but the Gandersnatch always watched me, with his wet eyes and his wet smile. It was a rather morbid story to hear every other week, but I remembered it like the back of my hand. You'd expect, too, that someone hearing something as traumatizing as that at such a young age would never badmouth anyone. Whether or not the Gandersnatch was real, sorry, I guess I can't read. It was a rather morbid story to hear every other week, but I remember it like the back of my hand. You'd expect, too, that someone hearing something as traumatizing as this would never badmouth anyone ever again. And whether or not the Gandersnatch was a real entity, sadly, I did badmouth. I failed to listen to her warning and cursed my mother the same way she did her father and pup. I never slept the night that she told me the story, and it still haunts me today, even now after my encounter with that thing. We moved out of Germany when I was around 8 years old. My father passed away a year later. We didn't have any form of a green card at all, so when my father passed away and he was the only one working on it, my mother resorted to remarrying to stay into the country. She married this man with no respect for women, and oftentimes would be unfaithful and disloyal towards my mother. However, she needed this to keep me into the country. Why we didn't just go home, I don't know. But we ended up hopping around the States until my new stepfather's mother died. I guess his father wanted some company up in their home towards his last few days. It took us 4 days straight of driving, and we finally got to Oregon, to which it was at least 12 hours minimum to get to the west border of Oregon to this town called Ridgeview. Okay, what's that? Is that right? That doesn't make much sense. 12 hours from... Ridgeview's in the west. Yeah, we're on the west. Maybe he may have had a typo. Maybe he meant from, like, California or something, because Ridgeview is on the very, very far west border of Oregon, which is where we are, so you should all know that. See, even here, where you and I live and breathe today. My stepfather had a huge log cabin. My stepfather's father had a huge log cabin where there was a memorial. It was a concrete headstone with 2 roses carved into it, and both of their names. Even though he hadn't died yet, it was carved with this year onto it. I guess he knows he will not live very long. When he entered, he was sitting on this broad wooden chair with leather cushions. The chair was in pristine condition. The walls were beautifully decorated, and a large fireplace was placed with a large sliding glass door perpendicular to it. Looking out the glass door was the beautiful view of all the ridges lining up with the horizon, and because it looked out to the west, you could see the sun set perfectly. Parallel to the fireplace was a wall with pictures and all sorts of other things attached to it. Above that was a balcony from the second floor, getting to look down on the main living space. Once we stepped in a little more, we could see the rest of the fireplace and see the huge moose skull and rib cage placed neatly engraved into the wall above. My new grandfather was sitting in his chair by himself. He had these large, boxy reading glasses and didn't even notice us enter. He was bald-headed even though he was only around 50. My stepfather, Joseph, walked up to him and patted his shoulder. Granddad looked up and said something along the lines of, "About time you showed up," or "I've been waiting for you." I can't remember it explicitly. He'd go on to talk to Joseph about how he was diagnosed with a tumor in his brain or something of that sort. I'd never got to hear because my mother pushed me off into my bedroom. I'd be staying in on the second story. Looking back on it, I guess my mom just wanted to get to know this man. The next day, I'd be going to a sort of orientation to my new school, and I laid in bed that night and cursed my parents, the typical thing for an angsty brat teen to do. I went up in my room and slammed my bag against the ground and got some things. I'd I'd need for the night, including a toothbrush and some other bathroom supplies. I got ready for bed and said the words, "I hate my mother, and I hate you too, Joseph. I hope you rot." Then I went to sleep. That night, I woke up to the sound of a long scratching tone ripping itself along the walls. I shot up and looked around the room to see a long, narrow finger just escape into the darkness of the bedroom. I looked around, seeing faces into the darkness. I thought they uttered my name, beckoning me into the darkness. I tucked myself underneath the large brown sheets of this ancient piece of furniture. The bed creaked with every shift I made. There would be voices in those shadows surrounding my room, avoiding the light of the moon or my small nightlight plugged into the wall. They'd call out to me, and the bed would utter back. The floorboards creaked, and then more scratching came surrounding me. I looked around the room, and I didn't see any scratching. It sounded like it was right in front of me, but I couldn't place a sound. Right in front of me was the window. I looked left and right, and I felt a warm breath against my neck. The noise was behind my headstand. My skin ran cold. My blood held still, but my heart pounded louder. My ears began to sing a song with tiny screeching, and I remembered how my grandma told me he didn't like to be looked at, and that he hides in the darkness. I finally remembered how to blink, and my blood started to run again. The pins and needles grew into my fingertips as the silence of the room only made the creaking of the bed louder. I quickly turned my head around, only for it to not move. My neck and body turned all the way. My neck and body turned all the way I told it to, but my head was stuck in place. I felt warm blood trickle out my nose and a cold grasp dig into my skull. Long fingernails cutting my scalp and parting my hair like Moses in the Red Sea. Then it let me go, and I fell out of the bed and hit my head on the creaky floorboards. Then I snapped back to realize it was only a dream. I woke up with my head crooked with my whole body on the floorboards. I got up and crawled back in bed as the creaks followed me. I looked over to my nightlight to see scratches in the wall where they weren't before. Or maybe they were. I couldn't tell. Anyways, I didn't get much sleep that night. The next night I got home from school, dropped off by the bus, and my grandpa was sitting in the same spot with his reading glasses on The next night I got home from school, dropped off by the bus, and my grandpa was sitting in the same spot with his reading glasses, reading a very heavy book. However, with his massive wrinkly hands held the book as if it were a feather. I walked up to him and hugged him, and he asked me how school was. I don't remember what I replied with, just the fact that it was bad. I went to bed that night without even talking to my parents. I cursed them again, repeating what I said the night before, being the emotional little brat that I was. I hate my mother and I hate you too, Joseph. I hope you rot. That night I saw the creature again, but it wasn't in a dream. I woke up to scratching again to see nothing this time. I thought it was behind my bed again. I looked behind me, but nothing at all. The creaks of the room almost drowned at the scratching until my bedroom door swung open as far as possible. My bedroom door had a single vertical slit in the wood that ran about a centimeter or two deep. There was no more scratching now, but the air grew thinner. Oh, okay. So, the vertical slit in the wood that he's talking about is a scratch from a creature. Okay. I got confused, I'm sorry. There was no more scratching now, but the air grew thinner. My blood stopped again, but my heart was racing. Pins and needles were on the tip of my tongue and each finger and toe. The darkness seemed to monger around me, collecting itself. Then amongst the shadows I saw this character in the darkness. I looked up at it thinking I saw legs and arms, but then I made eye contact with it, and all I saw were its wet eyes. Then a wet smile crept up its face, and I turned myself over and laid in bed, wrapping my head in my coarse blanket. I felt a cold sensation burn through the thickness of the sandpapery blanket. It pest my side as if I were some sick dog. Then I felt it draw away and my door creaked shut. I eventually slept that night. I woke up the next morning to see a vertical scratch in the wooden door, with curls of wooden sawdust on the floor. The third night, I got home, something similar had occurred. The air stiffened, my bones got cold, and my blood froze in place while my heart would beat faster and faster. The pins and needles took over my body again. When I saw him standing by my... The pins and needles took over my body again when I saw him standing by my nightlight. I still couldn't see his face. He hid from me in the shower of darkness, just like my grandmother described to me. My nightlight had blown out, and he just sat there smiling at it. His wet eyes pierced through my skull as if they were icy spears. I sat there for what felt like hours before I saw his body shift around the room. All the while, his eyes kept looking at me. My door opened, and he disappeared. I pretended to be asleep. My mother was going to find me awake and yell at me. But no one shut the door after a while. I looked over and saw that there was just no one there. Who opened my door? The fourth night, or maybe you could say this was the third legitimate night, Grandpa went upstairs to sleep in his large king mattress. My mother and Joseph had an argument again, so they slept in separate rooms. Joseph slept downstairs with his supply of drinks, and my mother slept in my bedroom with me. That night I shot up again, a cold lick against my neck, the window wide open, nightlight still broken. My blood froze, my heart pounding, pins and needles grew and overtook my body, and I started to cry. My mother got up and looked at me and asked me what's wrong when she heard the scratching at the door. She got up, where I started sobbing and telling her not to go to the door. She looks at me and tells me to be quiet. When she opened the door, there was no one there. The scratching continued. Then she lay back in bed, looking around with me. My closet door swung open and something threw the heavy blanket off the bed. The bed slid over about a meter and my mom fell out. I fell onto the brick of a pillow, though. The creature grabbed my mother by the ankle and lifted her into the air and dragged her out of the bedroom. My mother held onto the door seal before she let go, slammed against the other side of the seal, and dragged on her back out the door. I heard the door down the hallway swing open to see my grandpa in nothing but jeans come hauling out into the hallway. I turned around too quickly, and before I could see what was in his hands, I started running for the end of the hallway where my mom was being dragged away. Her screaming grew louder and louder with every bump she'd hit. Out of nowhere, this bright flash came from behind me, and a hole was blasted into the wall. I jumped and tripped over from how loud this bang was. The monster blinked out of existence for a moment as my mother dropped to the ground, but only for a second until the glossy eyes reappeared and my mother started getting dragged faster than before. My ears were ringing so loudly now, and when I could finally get back onto my feet, when I When I finally could get back onto my feet, oh, my ears stopped ringing. Grandpa was yelling in some super thick southern accent for my stepdad to get up. I heard my mother's body drag down the stairs and slam against the bottom headboard. I started to run down the stairs until something in the darkness grabbed my leg halfway down the stairs and ripped my shin open. I too fell down the stairs, but I guarded my head from getting hit. I got my aching body to carry me into the living room where I saw the chair Joseph had slept in was ripped into shreds. My mother was dragged right through the glass window and then dragged through the grass and mud, another blast shattering the other pane of glass. I ran all the way out to the patio before my body gave out and I collapsed into the ground. It is now 21 years later. I am 35. I have never seen my mother since. I have never seen Joseph since. My step-grandfather recovered from his illness and is still with me to this very moment. The cabin was repaired and I currently reside into it. I still see the gander snatch. I see his silvery eyes gleaming with their wetness in dark corners. He won't hurt me for some reason. I miss my mother. She didn't deserve this. Never be inappreciative of those around you, otherwise the gander snatch may get to them. That was a rather strange story. I know a thing or two about this topic, though. So, this creature that Curtis Miller, I think his name was. Yes, Curtis Miller. This creature that he is nicknaming the Gander Snatch is actually called a guilty one. I nickname them just guilties because it's why add the one onto it? Like, just say guilty. It just rolls off the tongue better. But anyway, these creatures are like demons in a way. Basically, they feed off of your negative energy and most popularly guilt, and they do this until they can take a physical form. And when they get to a physical form, they use all of their energy at once and will attack. And so what it sounds like here is that this creature has been around for a very long time. In fact, it sounds like it started haunting the grandmother. So the way that a guilty works is they watch you, like, or they watch the general area until they can find somebody with a powerful negative emotion to the point to where they use that to strike. They're just very aggressive and angry spirits. And they're not demons, they're not ghosts, they're just a separate thing. Or I guess they could be a demon, or they could be a ghost, but I don't know much about those. I do know a lot about these guys. So, so what it sounds like is this guilty in particular started haunting the grandmother because she had a bunch of guilt from when her father died, and I'm assuming it was World War II because Germany was invading Poland then. But that's what it sounds like, is that it was her who powered this thing, and it fed so much off of that to take the dog, and then just fed even more off of that because her stepfather probably made her feel even worse. So it just grew off of that, it sounds like. And then it followed Curtis, knowing that Curtis was the only other person who knew that it existed. So, luckily, you are not cursed, Curtis. You are simply just being haunted by something. And the best way to kill it, well, okay, you can't kill it. You can disable its physical body, and you can slow its return. Killing its physical body is just like, a physical fight, anything will do. But with preventing it from returning, keep a positive mindset, and just don't be negative. Eventually, it'll shrivel up and fall off. They're a lot like leeches in a way. If your body runs out of the supplement at once, it's going to shrivel up and fall off. Maybe that analogy doesn't work because you gotta die for a leech to. You know what I meant.